welcome and good afternoon, and sort of welcome to the end of the week. I hope you've all had a really successful week, and you are looking forward to a great weekend. Certainly, while I'm sitting in my lounge, the sun is shining brightly outside, so I'm looking forward to the weekend ahead. But before we get there, there's a bit more of the working week left, and I want to spend the next 40 minutes with you, just thinking about how we can connect better with our customers and connect better with our teams by building stronger communication, really helping us to understand each other and our teams better. On the webinar today, I also have my colleague Emily. She's monitoring the question and answer box for me and making sure the technical side of this webinar goes without a hitch. Thank you, Emily. And so I just ask if you want to put your contact details in the Q&A box, that would be great. And also, if you're listening to us for the first time, it'd be great to know where you're listening from, and do put your details in there, so whether you're in Birmingham or further afield. We've had some great locations reached over the last few weeks with our webinars. And we're also, I believe, Emily, we are broadcasting on Facebook Live, is that right?
Yes, that's right, we're on Facebook now.
Right, yes, yeah, so we're broadcasting on Facebook as well. So if you're listening to us on Facebook, also please do put where you're listening from. Please put your questions and answers or questions in the comments box below this video. And if we can't respond to you straight away during the webinar, we'll certainly get back to you straight after and reach out and answer those questions for you. If you're with us for the second or third time, please put hashtag repeat, and we'd love to know again what you've benefited from previous webinars, and also connect with you on social media. As I say, we're going to be about 40 minutes, 45 minutes today. And what I want to do with this webinar is help you to better understand your own behaviors and those of your teams, your colleagues, and your customers, help you to communicate in the most effective way and build fantastic relationships with your team and your customers through great communication. And I can guarantee by doing that, you'll increase your sales and your profits, and you'll free up your time. And most importantly of all, you'll create an amazing team within your organization. And at many webinars, I've been talking about communication over the last few weeks. And right now, communication is so important, particularly if we have teams that are spread around different locations, working remotely. And also our customers and our clients will also be working and located remotely. They may not be able to have that face-to-face contact. So communication is so, so important. This may well be your first time joining us here at Action Coach. And if it is, I just want to share very briefly a bit more about us. We are the world's #1 coaching company. We've been going for over 30 years, coaching all sorts of businesses from all different sectors and all different sizes. We have offices in over 91 countries around the world. And I had the privilege of meeting our owner and founder, Brad Sugars, back in February, long before lockdown. And I said to Brad, how big do you see Action Coach going? What's your vision for the organization? And without any hesitation, he said, Steve, I want to be in at least 109 countries. And I thought, well, that's an odd number, Brad. Why 109? So I asked him the question, and immediately he said to me, because McDonald's are in 108. So at that time, that was his thinking. And he's got this great vision for creating world abundance through business re-education, for reaching out to business owners and supporting them in growing their businesses. And people often say to me, well, what is a business coach? And the easiest and briefest way to give an analogy and describe it is, if you were to look at any key sports person, key sports team, to get where they've got to in their particular chosen field of sport, they have had a coach. You take any athlete, any tennis player, and I often use the example of the England rugby team, Eddie Jones. He doesn't teach them how to play rugby. They're already in that team, already playing at a really great standard on an international level. The coach comes along and looks at their game from a different perspective, looks at how they can play better together as a team, takes learnings from each and every training session, and gives them the right motivation and holds them to account on a daily, a weekly basis. So that when they go into that game, they're pumped full of energy, enthusiasm, and vision of winning that game. And then they take the learnings and hold each other to account after the game as well. That's exactly what we do is as Action Coach in Birmingham, and that's what I do as a coach with the many businesses I'm coaching day in, day out. We coach over 15,000 businesses a week across all the different countries, and interestingly, before lockdown, we were actually working in China and Russia as well. So there's a real need and a real demand for our services and for people to get the support and to reach out to coaches right now. But this isn't a sales pitch from me. What can you expect from the next 45 minutes? Well, I hope you will have some BFOs. What are BFOs? In our world, a BFO is a blinding flash of the obvious. It's that light bulb moment where you hear something that's being talked about in a learning setting, and you have that aha moment where your brain makes a connection between two previously known but unconnected bits of information. And I want my role today to be to help stimulate some of these for you as our audience. And so you've got that moment where the connection, the circuit is completed, and you can have that light bulb moment where you think, ah, yes, I understand now. I understand why that person behaves in that way, or I understand how I can now communicate with that customer in a better way. So it's really important to think about what you're hearing, and not to say I know, but to think, isn't that interesting? How can I apply that in my own business? I can see more people have joined since I started, so I won't keep repeating, but if you do want to ask any questions at any time, please do put them in the Q&A box, and we'll answer those as we go along. So I'm going to talk to you and introduce you today to a process called DISC. And some of you will have heard of other personality profiling systems, maybe epigenetics or Myers-Briggs, but DISC is very similar to those. There's also Belbin out there as well. It's a way of understanding people's behaviors and understanding your own behavior so that you can communicate with other people in a different way. So had I been able to do a DISC profile report on you before you joined us today, you may well be seeing something like this in a report that came back for you. And you'll have two styles. You'll have a natural DISC style, and you'll have an adapted DISC style. And depending on the job that you're in, the job you undertake, you may well have a different adapted style to your natural. So for example, we can see Phil in his natural style is quite an outgoing person, but in his job, he really has to suppress that. And I'll explain more about the different types in a minute. He really suppresses that in his working environment. And again, we see Katie Lewis in her natural style is not very detailed orientated, but in her job, she clearly has a role where she has to focus more on detail than perhaps she would outside of work. So I just share that with you, and I'll come back to those later on. But we have those two behaviors. We have the adaptive behavior, which is generated by your most responses if you were to do the questionnaire with us. And it reflects the behavior that meets the demands of your environment and is most changeable. So that's an adaptive behavior, maybe in a work or a particular setting that you change for that particular role or that particular setting. And your natural behavior is from the responses you may have given in a questionnaire, and it reflects your natural style. The behavior is your behavior under pressure and is least changeable. So if you're under pressure, those are the traits that you would display. One of the great things about doing this sort of profiling is that you can better understand your team and your colleagues. And I've also seen this done within the family setting as well. But here you can see this is very early on, because even my colleague Emily, who's with us today, isn't on this this graph. But we take great joy in profiling each person in the team, and we can then look at where we are on the different DISC profiles. So just to go through the four different elements of DISC, we have D, which is how you respond to challenges. So it's how dominating you are in a situation, how direct, how dominating. We have I, which is how you respond to others. It's your influence within a group or within a setting. We have S, which stands for steadiness. So how you respond to your environment. And then we have C, which is how you respond to rules and procedures, how compliant you are. And all people exhibit all four behavioral factors in varying ways and degrees of intensity. And Dr. Marston, in his book, describes this in much more detail. But it's a great way to try and understand others and our team. And as you can see there, the D, the dominance, is more results, more direct and more competitive. And I, a higher I, has much more enthusiasm, much more friendly and much more optimistic. They're always a glass always full rather than a glass half empty. And then we've got the steadiness, the sincerity, patience and modest. And we've got compliance for the C, which is more people who are more accurate, cautious and contemplative. And the D and the C are much more task orientated. The I and the S much more people orientated. The D and the I, as you can see on the screen, are much more outgoing, and the C and the S more reserved. So it's a great great visual just to describe those 4 elements. And I'm going to go through those now in a little bit more detail. So I'm going to start with the D. Now, as I said a moment ago, the D is people who are much more direct. They're results orientated. They are worried about the bottom line, a sort of organizer and a self-starter. They may well be more driving, more demanding, more decisive, sort of a doer, and much more dynamic. And I can imagine right now having conversations with people in meetings or directly or over the phone, and they'll be the kind of person that just wants you to get to the point. They want bullet points, short, sharp comments, and they want a decision right here, right now. We're not leaving this meeting until we've made a decision and we're going to go forwards. To put that into the social context, how would a D go swimming? Well, a D would be right in the deep end, jumping in the deep end straight away, not worried too much about anybody else, but in the deep end and doing what they want to do to get the most out of that session. How would they make decisions? Well, I've just described, they'd want a decision instantly. They want to have a quick solution and move on to the next challenge or the next issue in front of them. They're very direct and very dominating in a meeting or in a discussion. And to give an example in the world of media, Gordon Ramsay is a great example of a high D, somebody who's very direct, very dominating, and very clear about the outcomes he wants to achieve in his business, in the kitchen setting, and in life in general. Now, if we take that and think about the characteristics more generally, there's some great descriptors on the side, which I've already gone through some of those. But in terms of the value to the team that they bring, they would bring along if they were working with you, they'd be a bottom line organizer. They'd be forward looking, challenge oriented. They absolutely love a challenge, innovative, and initiates activity. They want to get things done. The ideal environment for somebody who is a high D is somebody who's got the freedom to act, somebody who likes a futuristic, forward-looking environment. They're able to express their ideas. They don't like routine, but they love that challenge and that opportunity. In terms of stresses that they tend to cause, or can be, you can have stress being around a D. They can be very demanding. They can make people feel very anxious and nervy. They can come across as a bit aggressive and also a bit egotistical. And some of their limitations, they may overuse the position they hold within your organization, or as a customer or as a client, may overuse their position in that role. They always set standards really high and expect a lot of the people they're talking to. They sometimes lack that tact and diplomacy. They are people who take on more than perhaps they can handle too soon and too fast. Now, if you have Ds in your organization, in your team, as employees, they like responsibility. So to get the most out of them, give them responsibility. Also give them the space to work on their own. They like to have control, so give them autonomy. They don't like micromanagement, and they assume the leadership role in a team environment. They're really self-confident of their own abilities. They prefer to delegate. They will start things but not finish them, and they work well with high Cs, which I'll come on to in a moment. They can sabotage, but they're also really competent. So in terms of other people in the team, they get along least out of all the other personalities of the people, but they can sabotage to high Is, as I've said. They work well with high Cs or high S's. They like confident people, so high Ds work well with high Ds. But if you're dealing with a customer who you think is a high D, or a member of staff who you think comes across as a high D, always give them the short version. Cut to the chase, get to the point, and avoid giving them too many details. Emphasize the success they can have by investing, by working with you, by being part of the team. Emphasize the outcomes because they are success orientated. Communicate with real confidence and appreciate their candid comments. Don't be offended by them. Don't take them to heart, but appreciate their real candid and short analysis and quick analysis of the situation they find themselves in. And whatever you do, don't procrastinate in front of a D or with a D, but get to the point and get a decision made. So that's Ds. And what I just encourage you to do as I'm going along through this webinar is just to think about some of the characteristics or people in your team and who they might be and write them down. So I'm just going to talk about an I. the I's in your team to think about who they might be. So I's in your team could well be the enthusiastic, those who negotiate the conflicts, those who are really impressionable. They're also team players. They're often people who are inspirational, interactive, sociable, and really interesting to be around. So who might you have in your team that reflects those characteristics? And just to think a moment about those I's, how might they go swimming? Well, I imagine the I's to be the ones who take longest in the change rooms. They're the ones who sit at the end of the call chatting to their friends. They want to make sure it's a fun event, making sure everyone's got something to do and is enjoying the team or the activity you're doing together. In terms of making decisions, they'll want to be there gathering everyone's thoughts and ideas, but also making sure that their ideas are on the table and heard. They want to make sure they're sort of listened to in the meeting, and they want to make sure that everyone has sort of really considered their idea above all else. In terms of I's in the personality world, Graham Norton is a great example of a high I. Somebody where it's all about that entertainment value, that sort of sitting down. It's all about him. He likes to be the center of attention. In terms of the value to the team that a high I can bring, they bring great optimism, enthusiasm, and great problem-solving skills to any team. They love to motivate others. They are brilliant team players, and they negotiate conflict really well. Their ideal environment is frequent people contact. They like to be in places where, in working environments where they can work closely with other people. They like freedom from control and detail. They love the forum for ideas and being heard, and they like to be a democratic supervisor. But they love that sort of idea of everyone getting their voice heard, most of all their own. Stress tendencies, if you're working with them or when they tend to get a bit stressed, is self-promoting. So you don't get a word in edgeways because they're always talking. They're overly optimistic, so they don't have quite as much of a balanced view. They can come across a bit too talkative at times, and also unrealistic. So we talked about the D's being a glass half full. Sorry, a glass full rather than half empty. The I's tend to always have the glass overflowing, sort of beyond the realistic expectations. In terms of some of their limitations, they are not that detailed, give that much attention to the detail. They can be unrealistic in appraisals. They can be too trusting, and they can be only a situational listener and not a genuine long-term listener. So they'll listen to the here and now, but won't take on board and won't remember things later on. As employees, if you think of people in your team, the I's make great salespeople. They really do. And they get along really well with others. They're great team members, and they can just be aware they can be too friendly, which can annoy the D. They like to work with others. They like to have fun. They make great team leaders because they enjoy inspiring and engaging and building those relationships, and they're great motivators. But in terms of interaction, they get along best out of all the other personalities. They get easy to get along with. They can annoy the C's and the D's. They can be too friendly or chilled out. They're great motivators and team leaders. They don't like disciplining. So if you've got a high I who is a team leader, that's great when when things are going well. But when there's a challenge and there's some discipline needed, they struggle in that area. In terms of dealing with them, if you're dealing with a high I, you need to win them over. You need to be their friend, show that you care, and have a great sense of humor. Other things to think out of is, don't be too serious. Deal with few details. Assure them that whatever you're wanting them to be involved with or take part in is fun, and let them talk. Give them the space to share their views. So who in your team might be a high I? And just while you're writing that down, I'm just going to check back in with my colleague Emily just to see if there's any comments or questions in the question box. Emily, over to you.
I think quite a few people are just getting to grips with the disc profiling, and it's pretty new to them, so I think they're just getting a better understanding of it, really.
Okay, so the comments are on those in that sort of reflect that. That's
yeah,
great.
kind of.
So, yeah, thanks, Emily. It is a new sort of concept for many, but hopefully, as I talk through these different personalities, you'll be thinking about your customers, your clients, your support suppliers, and of course your team, and just thinking, do they fit into one of these 4 areas? In terms of S, let's move on to S then. So who in your team might be an S? The amiable, service-orientated, stable, dependable S's. They're also very supportive, they can be submissive, and they like to specialize in certain areas. So thinking about that, how might an S go swimming? Well, in my view, an S would go swimming by making sure everyone else was looked after. An S may actually never get in the pool because they're worried and wanting to make sure that everyone's there. They'd be the one waiting outside for if somebody who thought was going to be there hasn't turned up. They'd be the one liaising with the people on the cash desk, making sure everyone's been paid, getting the goggles if somebody's forgotten their goggles, making sure everyone's got a changing room, then going out and sort of having the chat by the people on the side of the pool that didn't want to get in, or talking to the parents or families. So I would question whether an S would actually ever find time to get into the swimming pool. But if they did, they'd then be making sure everyone's got the floats and they're passed around. How do they make decisions? Well, they make decisions really slowly. And their main concern is to think about the impact on other people before the decision is made. So an S will need time to think about the consequences, the impact, and will come back with you with the decision once they've had time to think. They are not going to be somebody who makes a decision in the here and now. In terms of who might be a high S, we absolutely believe that Richard Branson is a high S. People often think, well, no, he must be a high D, but actually, you know, yes, he makes decisions, but he is always thinking about his team and others when doing so. In terms of general characteristics, a high S, they bring real dependency to a team. They work really well with other leaders. They are patient, empathetic, a logical thinker, and really service orientated, as I've said. Their ideal environment is stable and predictable. They need time to adjust to change. So you may think about S's in your team right now, particularly with the changes that we've all been going through, and they will need time to adjust. They like to build long-term relationships. They don't like conflict, and they are low in restrictive rules. In terms of the stress, they sometimes find it hard to demonstrate their views and their feelings. They might come across unconcerned. They will always be hesitant and sometimes inflexible. So it's just some of the areas you want to think about in terms of, you know, your S's in your team. And in terms of limitations, they do everything they can to avoid conflict. They have difficulty in setting priorities. They dislike unwarranted change, and they are troubled by diverse situations. So some challenges there for S's. So if you have S's in your team, and just think about the employees you have right now, they do make great team players. They work well alone as well with others. They're not as forward as a high I, but they do like to be around people, and they're really good at sales. But they are, just think about them, they are slow to change, as I said earlier on. They will take instructions really well from a leader. They're calm and will help that high D. Because a high D will get quite stressed and quite dominant. They will bring their complement to high D really well. They get along with the I's. They're both people orientated, and they team up really well with a C, but that could delay a task getting done because you've got people who like to contemplate and slow down. So if you're dealing with them, just think they'll need time to make decisions. Don't be too pushy with them. They like to build rapport. They are adverse to change. If you're asking them to do something differently, just bear that in mind and take them on the journey with you. And they don't like to be pressured. So who in your team do you have that might be a high S? And the last of the four characteristics is the C. Now the C are the analytical people in your team, the fact finders. They want to base decisions on the facts rather than their gut feelings. They always have high standards in themselves. They're very detail orientated. They can be cautious and compliant. They will always be concerned and be really careful in everything they do. So how will a C go swimming? Well, I imagine the C's are the ones that would have done the risk assessment first. And they'll be the one that's just looking out and always on the alert for danger, making sure if there's any young people in the pool that they've always got an adult with them. They're always they've got that constant risk assessment going on in their mind. But they'll also be asking, well, why do we need to go swimming? What's the benefit of it? And what are we going to get out of it? In terms of making decisions, before you get in a C to make a decision, they will want a paper backing up your proposal. They'll want to know what rational thinking you've been going through, what the decision process has been, and will want facts to back up the statements you're making before making a decision. In terms of high C's in the public arena, Mark Zuckerberg is certainly a high C, somebody who loves detail and doesn't quickly change to new ideas, but wants to think them through. So who is a high C in your team? The value they bring to the team are they maintain high standards. They are detail orientated, they're conscientious, they're steady, they define and clarify. They get information and tests. They love to test things out and find out the facts. They're really objective, so they're good at seeing different perspectives, and they are a problem solver. Their ideal environment is they need to think critically. They love technical work and specialized work. They love working in smaller groups with a familiar environment, and they often like their private office or work area. They like to have that exclusivity and their own space. They can be a bit pessimistic. They can be picky, fussy, and overcritical. In terms of limitations, they can be defensive, bogged in the detail, overly intense when talking to them, and appear cool and sort of distant when you're talking to them as well. So a C, who might you have in your team? What customers might you think of that would fit that profile? As employees, they love to work alone, as I've said. They're not great communicators. And think of this also as your customers. They work to high standards and will provide a lot of data before they'll come to a decision. They believe their way is the best and they are slow at decision making. When dealing with them, be skeptical. Bear in mind they can be resistant to change. They love having their own way of doing things. Provide as much information as possible when you're working with them, and don't expect a quick answer to your decision or to your question. They will go on and on and on and on before getting to the point. So on that basis, they can complement a high D, but they do have communications with a high D, because a high D wants bullet points and answers, and a high C wants to go through the theoretical issues and understand the background before getting to the point. So yes, on that basis, they need detail before proceeding. They get satisfaction from helping others and can work well with high I's if differences are put to one side. So in your team, who do you have that might be a high C? So I'm just going to pause there and let you, before I carry on and look at DISC and customer service, just think about your team for a moment and think about who you might have. Hopefully you've got a list of all your team members and you might just be juggling them around, putting them into different categories. And what I would say is people aren't always one type. People do move around, and as I said at the beginning, do adapt, but they're natural. Think about their natural behaviors. Where do you think they would naturally fit in those four categories? So I'm just going to talk a bit about DISC and customer service for the next sort of 15 minutes or so. Sorry, the next 5 minutes or so, and then we're going to talk a bit about other communication methods. But D's, in customer service, they, to communicate effectively, you need to be brief, cover the high points, the top level points, focus on results and let them win, and be direct. Their service expectations of you will be to be effective and efficient. And if you have a dissatisfied customer who is a D, they could be stubborn, unyielding, controlling, and dictatorial. So it's just ways of identifying your customers and thinking about how you can work better with them. In terms of a high I, customer service, to communicate with them effectively, you need to be enthusiastic, talk about personal things, socialize, and use gestures and touch. In terms of expectations of you, they will be caring and relaxed. And as a dissatisfied customer, just identify them. Bear in mind that they will be really talkative. You'll find it hard to get your point across. They could be quite superficial, a poor listener, and come across a bit conceited. So how can you improve your communication style so that you relate to each of these customers so they become raving fans of you? So that's the D and the I. And so in the world of S and C, so again, in terms of customer service, to communicate effectively with a high S, you need to have a relaxed tone, a slower pace, talk logically, take time, and ask questions of them. They will want you to be caring and relaxed in terms of your service. And as a dissatisfied customer, they will be possessive, unemotional, detached, and quite stubborn. So just think about how you can improve your behaviors or your communication to relate to them. And in terms of C, the compliance, to communicate effectively with them, you need to give them lots of information, stick to the business in hand, and analyze the questions carefully and listen to them. Their service expectations will be perfection and really high standards of you. And as a dissatisfied customer, they'll be inflexible, hard to please, and overly cautious to find the solution. So again, just ask that question, how can you improve your communication so that they become raving fans of you and your organization? In terms of selling, there's some really easy ways to identify, as I've just talked about, the different dominance characteristics, personality profiles of your clients, your customers, and just ask yourself some questions. So are they introverted or extroverted? If they're an extroverted, they're likely to be either a D or an I. So then ask yourself, are they people or task orientated? If they're people orientated and they're extroverted, they're going to be an I. If they are people orientated and introverted, then they're going to be an S. So it's two questions you can ask that will identify very quickly your customers, your clients in front of you. And as you build that relationship, you'll be able to answer those questions even more clearly. And then it's about how do you communicate with them to try and sell your product. I'll just give you a moment to digest that screen. And just as I am doing that, I'll just check in again with Emily to see if there's any comments or feedback in the Q&A box. Emily, are you there?
Yeah, sorry, just having a few issues with my mic.
Oh, sorry, Emily. Good. Any other comments or feedback or questions?
We have one question asking, how do you deal with a high D customer as a dissatisfied, I can't even say the word now, dissatisfied customer?
Okay, yeah, so it just goes to, maybe I moved on from the screen a bit quickly, but it's bearing in mind that they will be stubborn, unyielding, and controlling. So it's about, being effective and efficient and being very clear to the point and being very, polite, but being, sort of trying to take control of the situation, giving them solutions very quickly and very early on. Don't sort of beat around the bush about getting some solutions on the table, and start negotiating with them quite early on if they're a dissatisfied customer, is how I'd recommend dealing with them. I hope that answers the question for the person who asked it.
Yeah, I believe so.
Right. Thanks, Emily. Thanks. Why is understanding this so important? The more you understand your communication style, the more you understand how your communication impacts on others. And understanding or even mastering your communication and DISC means that you can communicate more effectively with more people. And so it's really a good way to look at how you can work better with people, how you can work better with your clients, your customers, and your team. But sitting alongside DISC, there is something called VAK, and that's your preferred communication method. And VAK stands for three things. There's three modes of communication. There's your visual, your auditory, and your kinesthetic. And your visual is all about seeing and looking. The auditory is all about telling and hearing. And the kinesthetic is all about feeling and touching and hands-on. And 40% of the population by dominance are visual, 20% auditory, and 40% kinesthetic in terms of their preferred communication style. Think about visual people for a moment. I'm not going to be through all these bullet points, but you can see them on the screen. Visual people need to be an overall view and purpose, and they are very neat and orderly. They're observant of detail. They memorize by visual association, often fast readers, and they forget to relay verbal messages to others because it's all about what the here and now. And they often answer questions with a simple yes or no, and would love to do a demonstration rather than make a speech at the front of a room. So just to put that into some sort of context, I just want to think about selling a car. How would you sell a car to somebody who's a visual person? You'd emphasize on how it looks. You bring attention to the color, the chrome trim, or the design, the sleek shape of the car. You talk about how the dashboard looks and how it functions, the style. Use as many visual words as you can in your description and your conversation, such as picture yourself driving down the highway or the motorway. Picture yourself sitting in this car, washing the car on the drive. Visualize yourself picking your children up from school. Imagine what it'd be like. It's all those words are very visual words in how you sell that car to that client. We then have auditory. And these people who are easily distracted by noise, they enjoy reading aloud, they find writing difficult but are better to tell and talk. They're very eloquent speakers on the whole. They love music and sound. They are talkative and love discussions and go into very lengthy detail, and can spell better out loud than they can in their writing. So again, thinking about an auditory person, how might you sell a car to an auditory person? Well, you talk about the sound of the engine purring down the motorway, the sound of the closing door. And I always remember when I've been to buy my cars, many salespeople will open the door and close it and say, listen to the sound of the quality of this car. You perhaps talk about the quietness of the tyres against the road. You'd emphasize as many sound words as possible. Hearing your friends, you talk about hearing your friends and your family. I can just imagine, I can just hear them saying what a great choice you've made in buying this particular vehicle. It's all about the sounds that that car associates for that potential client. And lastly, kinesthetic. So they'll speak slowly with long pauses. They'll stand close when talking to you. They'll learn by manipulating and doing. They memorize by walking and seeing. And you can often tell when these people, because they'll gesture with their hands a great deal as they're talking. They can't sit still for very long. It's all about action, and they love to get involved and loving being involved in games and wanting to act things out. So how might you sell a car to a kinesthetic person? Well, I can imagine emphasizing how it feels to drive the car. The rich leather, how that feels against the body, or as you sit in it, how soft and smooth and comfortable it is. Think of the rush of the acceleration, the fast control and responsive braking. And you'll be using words that emphasize how it feels, the hands on the wheel, the smell of the new car, the foot on the accelerator, the control of the steering. All of these things you'd use to sell a car to a kinesthetic person. But you're probably sitting there thinking, well, how do I know which one of these somebody is? If I've got a customer on a phone right now, and particularly as we're in the world of Zoom and phone calls, working remotely, how do I identify each of these types of people over the phone? Well, it's about listening out for their language, listening out for the words that they're using in their conversation with you. So you may well be thinking of somebody visual, or you may think somebody's visual. So while they're using the word see, picture this, I'm going to be focusing now, imagine. It's a bit short-sighted of you to say that. Oh, you're a sight for sore eyes, or you've got tunnel vision, or you're painting the picture. I've got a clearer view now. Those are all words in conversation, if you've got somebody on the phone or on a Zoom call or face-to-face, that are visual, descriptive words of a visual person. And the same with auditory. So they may well use language that resonates with them. They may value silence. They may talk about the music. They may use phrases such as, it's quiet as a mouse. Or, would you like to voice your opinion to me? Oh yes, that's as clear as a bell. Or, I hear you loud and clear. But on another note, I'm going to tune out or tune in right now. These are all words, the descriptive words in conversation that an auditory person would use. And what you want to be doing is trying to repeat or reflect the same language back to them. And lastly, a kinesthetic may well talk about the feeling of something. They feel this, they feel that, they can now get a grasp of what you're saying. That's a really solid point you're making. Yes, it's much more concrete than what you had before. I'm going to throw that idea out. I'm going to get in touch with, or just hang on in there. We'll get it sorted. I'm going to tap into some new ideas. You can see they're all words that are very much kinesthetic. They're all about touch and feel. So listen out for those words and try and identify your clients, and then use the same language back. So I go back to the charts that I started with at the beginning, and hopefully they make more sense now in terms of how people have a natural behavior and an adapted behavior. And hopefully I've given you some ideas on how you might be able to communicate more effectively with your clients, your team, and your customers. One of the great things to do is not only do a profiling report on yourself, but also to think about how your team work and what kind of people you might have to work alongside. And here we can see an example of how we've mapped a team. We've looked at people interactions, team support, we've looked at accommodation, rules versus results, and we've mapped people in a team against different natural behaviors. And then we've done the same thing with the same categories over the adapted behaviors. And it's just really interesting to see how people respond and how people behave in different environments. And I'm sharing this with you now because it's really important to try and understand your team better so that you can work better with them. You can get better results, but also you can see where the gaps and the overlaps are in your team. So at the bottom there, we can see the average and the median for each of these different areas of the disc profiles. And you can see, particularly on the Ds, how much more D there is in this particular team when we're using our adaptive behaviors. We've got people there who are more dominant in the workplace than they would be in their natural environment. So it's really important to try and understand your teams, particularly if we're bringing our teams or starting to think about bringing our teams back together now, having been on furlough or been remote working for such a long period of time. It's thinking now about how we can better communicate and make better use of our teams in terms of working better together going forwards. You may have different roles, different responsibilities in your team, and have different team members. So it's how you can work better together with them. One of the things we are offering today is we're doing individual reports. Normally we'd offer them at £50, but if you're listening to this webinar today and taking part, we're happy to do that for just £18 today. So if you want an individual report for your team, then please do, or sorry, for yourself, please do get in touch, put your comments and questions in the Q&A box. We'll make a note of those and we'll get back to you after the webinar. We also would encourage you to think about team reports for your team, and then we can take that further into sort of a training session, either 2 hours or a full day, and look at how we can bring that information together and use that to develop your team and align your team going forwards. And that would be something like a 2-hour workshop, which would include introductions, a history of DISC, how it works. We'd then do a bit of a quiz, roles, which profiles, and talk about different profiles and personalities, which I've touched on today in the webinar, and then interpreting the data. So looking at individuals as well as the team reviews, then looking at the strengths and the challenges, and then talking about the opportunities and the next steps. So if you think a team alignment or team development is really important and something that you want to focus on right now with in your organization, please do get in touch. We'd love to have that initial conversation with you and just talk about what we could be doing with you and how we can help you to communicate better with your team and your colleagues and your customers. So I'm coming to the end of this webinar today. It's slightly shorter than our other ones. It's about 45 minutes. But just before I end, I just want to share with you the words of Brad Sugars. His words can inspire, thoughts can provoke, but only action truly brings you closer to your dreams. So it's about what have you taken from today's webinar? What notes have you taken? And how can you put those into action and do something about it in the future? You know, what action are you going to take right now, today? I hope that you've had some BFOs, some blinding flashes of the obvious. Just before I finish, I'm just going to check in with Emily just to see if there's any more comments or questions before we finish. Emily, is there anything else in the Q&A box?
I've been answering questions myself, and I believe you've covered everything. So yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you so much. It's always nice to have a slightly shorter webinar on a Friday. I hope you've really enjoyed being with us today. And if you have any questions or want to reach out to us after this, our email address, Emily will put in the Q&A box as well, but it is birmingham@actioncoach.com, and our website address is birmingham.actioncoach.co.uk. So the email is birmingham@actioncoach.com, and the website is birmingham.actioncoach.co.uk. And I can see that Emily has also put those in the Q&A box for our listeners today as well. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much. Please do reach out, get in touch. We'd love to have a conversation with you, talking a bit more about your team, your customers, and how you can use a disc profiling system to build better relationships with your team and ultimately build your business to be so much more successful into the future. Thank you. Stay well, stay safe, and we look forward to you joining us again next week for one of our Lunch and Learn webinars. Take care now. Bye-bye.